The next topic is operating system, and in the operating system these are the important topics. So in today's session, first we are going to see what exactly is the operating system and what are its function. Afterwards we are going to classify the operating system based on platform, based on execution method, and based on source code availability. And finally, and very important from the exam point of view, is the examples. This is very important, and in the exam you will get one question from example itself. Okay, so we are going to see examples of various OS like MS, Windows, Linux and Mac OS. Okay, so we have seen the classification of the software in the previous chapter, and where we have discussed there are two types of software. First one is application software and the second one is the system software. And the agenda of today's session would be operating system. Okay, so the very first and the foremost pointer is that it is a type of system software. It is not an application software. What is the difference between application software and system software? I am not going to discuss in today's class because we have already discussed in the previous class. Okay, so for timing you just remember it is a type of system software. Okay, and since it is a system software, it is going to act as the interface between user and the hardware. Okay, and a very important one is a kernel. So this terminology is very important. Kernel is the central part or the core part of the operating system. And a very important pointer again, if you don't have any operating system, computer cannot boot. It should have an operating system. So this pointer was asked in NTPC and banking exam. Okay, so for booting, for running your computer, it should have one operating system. And sometime he will turn around a question. So whenever computer is turned on, so the first thing that is loaded into a computer memory is the operating system. Okay, so the first thing that is going to be loaded in the computer memory is the operating system. Okay, so when you start your computer, operating system is the first thing that is loaded into the computer memory. And operating system provide two type of interface, like character user interface. This abbreviation you should know, CUI and GUI. So CUI stand for character user interface, where user will only be allowed to feed the characters to the software. Okay, so through characters he can communicate with the operating system. The other one is graphical user interface, where there will be icons, there will be tools, there will be ribbons, there will be some menu bar. Many things are there in graphical user interface. Okay, and these are the two interfaces which are generally provided by the operating system. And Xerox, a company, basically invented this graphical user interface in 1981. Okay, got it. So, and the first OS, if you talk about, it is GMNNAIO. What does this mean? It is General Motors, a motor company, and NNA means North American Aviation. Input output routine was written, which is regarded as the first operating system, and it is basically a type of batch OS. Okay, so it is first operating system GMNNAIO, okay, in year 1956. Okay, coming to the major function, I'm not going to talk about details regarding this function because it is itself a separate chapter for learning these functions. So basic thing I will tell you in today's session. The first one is a process management. The first function is process management. So which and how to execute a program. So we have seen a definition of program. Program is a set of instructions which are written in some language. So which, where and how to execute a program is the responsibility of OS in terms of process management. So there will be many processes which are running on your PC. So how to manage those processes is a major function of operating system. Since a process should be reside in memory, so memory management will also come into picture, where to put the program in the memory that operating system need to decide. Similarly, it can never be like in primary memory, it should be written in some secondary storage. So where to store the data or software in secondary storage is the responsibility of again OS as a term file management. Since OS is also responsible for interacting with the external device like mouse, pen drive, camera, so it is going to manage the external device as well. The next one is security. Since our PC is having data and the software, so how to secure data from the malicious access, that is again one of the primary function of the operating system. And finally, how to interact with the user, whether it is a character based or the graphical user interface, that is also one of the function of the operating system. Okay, so let's classify the operating system. The first classification is based on the platform, where if you see, there are general purpose operating system, mobile operating system, network OS system, embedded OS and real-time OS. From exam point of view, these are the two important OS which are commonly asked in the exam. General purpose OS, which is basically designed for the general public or the laptop or the desktop, which is commonly used in the public domain. Okay, the examples are Microsoft Windows, Apple Mac OS, Linux and Unix. Coming to the mobile OS, which are used in smartphones, the popular example are Apple iOS or the Google Android. These are the mobile operating system. The network OS, which is used in the network, like Windows Server and Linux Server, which act as a server in the network systems. Okay, embedded OS, so which are basically operating system which are for the embedded platform where hardware and the software are tightly coupled. And finally, real-time operating system, which has priority on the time, it should deliver the result within the deadline. So those are real-time operating system. Okay, so for exam point of view, you should know general purpose OS and mobile OS, and we are going to discuss in today's session. The next one is the classification of operating system based on execution model. Okay, so there are different type of execution method. The first one is a batch OS. Batch OS, as the word suggests, that jobs are going to be executed in batches. Okay, batches means a set of the programs, and while executing the batches, no user interaction is allowed. And this type of OS are commonly used in the early mainframe computers. Okay, the next one is time sharing OS. As the word again suggests, that time will be shared. What time? It is CPU time. Okay, ultimately at the end of the day, CPU is going to execute the instructions, execute the program. So if multiple users share the CPU time, it is basically a time sharing OS. And the examples of such OS are Unix and Linux. The next one is multi-programming and multitasking. Like if you talk about multi-programming, several programs can run in the memory at once. Again, it is Windows and Linux. Multitasking means there are multiple tasks which are running simultaneously on your PC. So that terminology means multitasking. And all these operating system like Linux, Windows and Mac OS, all those are multi-programming, multitasking and time sharing OS. But if you talk about distributed OS, which are commonly run on the network computer, okay, And real-time OS, as I told you, which generally execute the task within the time. So these are basically strict time in nature. The examples are VxWorks, QNX, and RT Linux. Okay, so this is another way of classification of OS based on the execution methods. And classification of OS based on source code availability we have already discussed in the previous chapter of the software. So source code is the code or the instructions which are written is revealed in the open source software. Okay, if source code is available on the platform or on the website, it is known as open source software. Okay, whereas in the closed source software, the source code is hidden from the user. Okay, and since it is available, so generally they are free in nature, whereas proprietary software are the hidden one. Okay, and modification is allowed in the open source software because source code is available, so you can modify and make it your own, but it should be under general public licensing. Okay, and whereas if you talk about proprietary software, nothing is allowed because source code is not available. And the very popular examples are Windows, MS Office, and Mac OS, whereas Linux, if you talk about, it is an open source software. Okay, the next one and very important one, if you talk about, these are the examples of operating system, and we have seen in fact all the exams. If you talk about RRB, NTPC, JEE, SSC, CHSL, all the exam we have seen the examples of operating system. Okay, the very first one is MS-DOS, and the full form is Microsoft Disk Operating System. Okay, DOS means Disk Operating System, and it was introduced by the company Microsoft in 1981. Okay, in 1981 Microsoft has introduced MS-DOS. Basically this operating system was single user, and it is purely character user interface based OS. Okay, it became very popular in India, in fact, in early 2000s. Okay, so after DOS, Microsoft has released a Windows operating system. Okay, so Microsoft has introduced this MS Windows. Why Windows? Because it looked like a window pane. So window pane, if you have seen, these are rectangle in nature. So they have given terminology Windows for the Windows GUI that they have made. Okay, and it is GUI based operating system, whereas DOS was character user interface operating system. And there are many versions, in fact. So currently we have seen Windows 11. Okay, so the popular versions are this one: 95, Windows 95, Windows 98, XP, Vista, Windows 7, Windows 8, Windows 10. Okay, so these are the versions of Microsoft Windows. The next important operating system is Unix, and the full form is Uniplex Information Computing System, UNICS. Later it is abbreviated as UNIX, but the full form is Uniplex Information and Computing System. And it was developed by two famous scientists, Thomson and Ritchie. Those are the designer of C language also, which is very popular nowadays, in 1969 at AT&T Bell's Lab, America. Okay, and it is purely written in C language, and it is multi-user multitasking operating system. So the next one is Linux. It is again based on the Unix operating system, and the very important feature which is commonly asked in the exam, it is an open source operating system. Okay, so it is an open source operating system which is based on the Unix, and the full form is Linux is not Unix. Okay, so if you think about that, it is based on Unix, but the full form says that Linux is not Unix, it is derived from the Unix, in fact. And the creator, sometime he will ask, so your answer should be Linus Torvalds in 1991. Okay, Linus Torvalds is the creator for the Linux operating system. And there are many distribution or the packed version of Linux. So these terminologies are commonly asked in exams. So Ubuntu, Fedora, Debian, Red Hat, all these are some flavors of the Linux. Okay, ultimately these are the operating system which have used the Linux kernel for their development. Okay, and in fact one good thing is that Android, which we are right now using in our smartphone, is basically based on the Linux operating system. Okay, so you can see the popularity of Linux operating system. So the many flavors are there, and Android mobile OS is also based on the Linux. The next one is a Mac OS. So the full form is Macintosh operating system. Macintosh operating system. Why Macintosh? Why Macintosh? So if you see the label of the Apple computer or any Apple thing, you have one Apple logo. Okay, why? Because the person who actually started this project, Jeff Raskin, it is named after one Apple variety called Macintosh. Okay, but already there was a company name with this Macintosh, so they have added MAC and Macintosh. So in this way the Macintosh operating system has come, and it is Unix based OS, and it was developed by the Apple in 1984 as the name System 1, but later it is named as Mac OS. Okay, and the important pointer is that it is going to be run only on the Apple hardware, not any other Intel or Amazon hardware. Okay, so it will going to run on the Apple based hardware only. Okay, so there are many Mac OS version like Cheetah, Puma, Jaguar, Panther, Maverick, Catalina. So these versions are basically the versions of Mac OS, not the Linux. Okay, so this pointer was asked in RRB and TPC, so you should remember the Mac OS versions also. Okay, so the current version is Tahoe, which is version number 26. These are the version of Mac OS. Next one is the mobile operating system Android, and it was initially developed by a company called Android, which is acquired by Google in year 2005. And Andro means human, ID means like, so it like human like. Okay, so there was one person who was developing this Android operating system, so he was very fond of humanoid. Okay, so based on that he had made this name, and it is open source as I told you, and it is based on the Linux operating system. And there are various Android versions like Cupcake, Honeycomb, KitKat, Lollipop, Marshmallow. The name you should remember. And the latest one is the Android 16. And from 2019 onwards, numeric names are given, not the named version like earlier. Okay. The next one, iOS, that is mobile operating system for iPad and iPhones by the Apple company. And I stand for the internet, and introduced by the Steve Jobs, who is the founder of Apple Inc. in 1998. I stand for the internet. And it is a closed source operating system, and it only runs on the Apple hardware. Whether it is a Mac OS or iOS, it is going to run on the Apple hardware, not any other hardware. And the latest version is iOS 26. Okay,